Sometimes the truth we've been protected from is the one that sets us free. This is Emily's story, a journey of love, loss, and the secret her parents kept hidden for years. The morning sunlight spilled gently across the kitchen table, catching the edge of a half-empty cup of coffee. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of an old wall clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. Emily Turner sat by the window, her hands wrapped around the cup, eyes distant, like someone waiting for something that might never come. Her world had always been quiet, the kind of quiet that felt safe to everyone else, but heavy to her, a silence filled with questions that no one ever answered. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the street, painting soft colors on the world beyond her window. She watched them fall one by one, her reflection faint in the glass. 30 years old, kind eyes, the gentle grace of someone who had learned to keep her emotions tucked neatly away. But behind that calm exterior, Emily carried a quiet longing, the kind of longing that didn't have a name. It wasn't about someone she loved or something she wanted. It was about the feeling of being unfinished. Since her mother's passing 2 months ago, the house had felt emptier than ever. Each corner held echoes of laughter, memories of birthdays, little handwritten notes her mother used to leave on the fridge. But there were also shadows, unanswered questions Emily had never dared to ask. She had always believed her family story was simple. Her mother, Laura Turner, had raised her alone after Emily's father passed away when she was 6. Laura never spoke much about him, only that he was a good man who had to leave too soon. As a child, that was enough. As an adult, it wasn't. Now, in the stillness of the house they once shared, Emily sometimes caught herself talking to the empty air. "I wish you told me more, Mom, about him, about us." Her voice trembled slightly, swallowed by the quiet. She didn't cry much anymore, not because she didn't want to, but because she had learned that grief wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was soft, like a melody only your heart could hear. Every day after work, she returned to this same kitchen, the same coffee cup, the same silence. And every night she promised herself she'd start going through her mother's things, the boxes in the attic that had been waiting for years. But she never did. Something in her hesitated, as though opening those boxes would mean opening a part of herself she wasn't ready to face. That changed on a rainy Saturday morning. The sky was gray, the air cool, and the rhythm of the rain was strangely comforting. Emily found herself climbing the attic stairs, a small flashlight in her hand. The door creaked open to reveal a room that smelled faintly of cedar and dust, a small, forgotten world where time had stopped. Old suitcases, Christmas decorations, faded photographs, all neatly stored by the mother who loved order even in her memories. Emily smiled faintly at the sight of a box labeled Emily's Childhood. Inside were her old drawings, a pink sweater, and a birthday card that said, "To my sunshine." Her heart ached. And then, near the bottom of another stack, she found something different, a small wooden box, unlike the rest. The wood was darker, carefully polished. Inside lay a sealed envelope, the paper slightly yellowed, but still intact. Her name was written across the front in her mother's graceful handwriting. For Emily, when the time feels right. Her breath caught. She turned the envelope over, half expecting it to be empty or just a note of love and farewell. But something about those words, "when the time feels right," sent a shiver through her. It sounded like her mother had known this moment would come, like she had been waiting for Emily to find it. Emily sat down on an old chest by the window, the sound of the rain faint against the roof. She ran her thumb along the edge of the envelope, feeling the weight of the unknown inside it. For a long moment, she couldn't bring herself to open it. Instead, she just sat there, remembering the warmth of her mother's smile, the way she used to hum while cooking, the scent of lavender that always lingered in her hair. Then, finally, with trembling fingers, Emily broke the seal. The letter inside was short, no more than a few paragraphs, but every word felt alive, as though her mother were right there beside her, speaking softly through the ink. "My dear Emily, If you are reading this, it means I'm no longer there to tell you what I should have told you long ago. Please forgive me. There are things about your father that I kept from you, not to deceive you, but to protect you. I wanted you to have peace, even if it meant not knowing everything. But the truth has a way of finding us, and I believe it's time you know. His story didn't end the way you were told. Emily's heart stopped. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming softly on the attic roof, like a heartbeat echoing her own. Her eyes blurred with tears as she read the final line. If you wish to understand, go to Willow Creek. You'll find what I could never say. She lowered the letter slowly, her mind spinning. Willow Creek, a name she had never heard before. The attic seemed different now, quieter, almost expectant, like it was holding its breath with her. Somewhere deep inside, a small spark flickered. Curiosity, fear, and hope all tangled together. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt something awaken. She didn't know what she would find in Willow Creek, but she knew she had to go. And as the rain whispered softly against the window, she felt the weight of her mother's secret settled gently in her heart, the truth that might change everything she thought she knew. The road to Willow Creek wound through quiet hills and fields of gold, where autumn leaves drifted across the asphalt like soft confetti. Emily drove slowly, her mother's letter folded neatly on the passenger seat beside her. The world outside looked peaceful, too peaceful for the storm quietly turning inside her. Every turn of the wheel seemed to take her deeper into the countryside and into her own thoughts. She couldn't stop wondering what kind of truth her mother had hidden. Why the secrecy? Why the mystery of Willow Creek? The town appeared like something out of a painting. A main street lined with maple trees, a bakery with a red awning, an antique shop with wind chimes that sung in the breeze. It felt untouched by time, warm and welcoming, yet full of unspoken stories. Emily parked near a small cafe called the Lantern Cup. She needed a moment to think, and perhaps a cup of coffee to steady her thoughts. The air smelled of cinnamon and rain, and the cafe's windows glowed softly from the inside. As she stepped in, a tiny bell above the door chimed. There, behind the counter, was a man in his early 50s, tall, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of gentle smile that put people at ease. His name tag read Daniel. "Welcome," he said warmly. "Cold day, isn't it? Can I get you something hot?" "Coffee, please," Emily replied, her voice quiet. "Black." Daniel nodded. "You got it." Something about his voice, the calm tone, the easy kindness, reminded her faintly of her father's few recordings she had once found on an old cassette. She shook the thought away. When he handed her the cup, their eyes met for a moment too long. Not awkward, just curious. There was a strange familiarity she couldn't quite name. She sat by the window, watching the rain begin again. The cafe was cozy, walls covered in old photographs of Willow Creek through the decades. She glanced at one, a group of townspeople standing beside a lake. The caption beneath read, "Summer Fair, 1994. Her eyes caught on a face in the back row, a man with the same kind smile she remembered from a single faded photo her mother kept hidden in a drawer. Her heart skipped. It looked like her father. When Daniel walked by to clear a table, Emily hesitated, then asked softly, "Excuse me, do you know anyone named Michael Turner?" The question froze the air between them. Daniel slowly set the tray down. He looked at her closely, as though searching for her face for a memory he had long buried. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "I did. Very well, in fact." Emily's breath caught. "You knew him?" Daniel nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Yes, he used to live here. It's been many years." She didn't know what to say. For the first time, the name Michael Turner didn't feel like just a story from her mother's past. It felt alive, real, breathing again in this small-town cafe. Daniel hesitated, then asked gently, "You remind me of him." That night, back in a small inn by the river, Emily couldn't sleep. The sound of raindrops against the window carried her back to her childhood, to moments she hadn't thought about in years. She remembered her father's voice, low and warm, reading her bedtime stories about stars and oceans. She remembered the way he'd draw tiny hearts in her coloring books when she wasn't looking. And then she remembered the day everything changed. She was 6. Her mother had picked her up from school early. There were no explanations, just silence, and her mother's trembling hand gripping hers tightly as they drove home. That night, the house felt different, colder. Her father's coat was gone from the rack, his shoes gone from the mat. When she asked where he was, her mother said softly, "He's gone to rest, sweetheart. He loved you more than anything." She believed those words her whole life, until now. The next morning, she returned to the cafe. Daniel greeted her with the same gentle warmth, but she could see something in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe guilt. She decided to ask the question that had been keeping her awake all night. "Daniel, how did you know my father?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned toward a corner table by the window. "Sit with me." The wind rustled softly outside as they sat down. Daniel looked out the window for a long moment before speaking. "Your father came to Willow Creek a long time ago. He wasn't from here, but he became part of this town quickly. Everyone liked him. He had a kindness that you don't forget." Emily listened, her hands clasped around her coffee cup. "I met him one summer," Daniel continued. "He used to come here every morning for breakfast, always ordered the same thing: eggs, toast, and black coffee. Sometimes he'd talk about his daughter, said her name was Emily, said she had the brightest smile he'd ever seen." Her throat tightened. "But one day," Daniel said, his voice softer now, "he told me he was leaving. He didn't say where or why, only that he had to. He looked heartbroken, like a man carrying a secret too heavy for anyone to understand." Emily felt tears blur her vision. So he was alive all this time? Daniel nodded. "Yes. For a while, yes. But I never saw him again." The silence between them was thick with emotion, not loud or dramatic, just quietly aching. Outside, the rain began again, tapping gently on the glass, the same rhythm that had followed Emily since she'd opened that letter. For years, she had thought her father was gone forever, but now, in this small town filled with whispers of the past, she realized his story was still here, alive in memories, in friendships, and in the quiet echoes of people who had known him. And though she didn't have all the answers yet, she knew this: the truth her mother had hidden wasn't meant to hurt her. It was meant to lead her somewhere, to understanding, to healing, and perhaps to the part of her heart that had been waiting all along. The next morning, Willow Creek woke under a soft blanket of fog. The air smelled of pine and river mist, and the town seemed quieter than usual, as though it knew something important was unfolding.
Emily stood by her car in the inn's gravel parking lot, holding her mother's letter again. The ink had faded slightly from all the times she'd read it, yet every word still carried the same weight. She traced the final line with her thumb. Go to Willow Creek. Her mother hadn't said why, but now Emily understood. There was something here, something her mother wanted her to see, or someone she wanted her to meet. As she folded the letter back into her coat pocket, she caught sight of Daniel walking down the street, holding a tray of steaming coffee cups. He was on his way to open the cafe. There was something steady about him, not in the way of someone who had it all figured out, but of someone who had learned to carry his quiet sadness gracefully. Without really planning to, Emily followed him. The lantern cup was still closed, but Daniel saw her through the window and smiled. He unlocked the door and motioned her in. "You're up early," he said. "So are you," Emily replied softly. He chuckled. "Habit. The town wakes up with coffee, and I like being the first to make it." The cafe smelled like fresh bread and roasted beans. The chairs were still turned upside down on the tables, and sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting golden stripes across the floor. Emily hesitated before speaking. "Daniel, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "When my father left, when he disappeared, do you know where he went?" Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "He didn't say much, but before he left, he asked me for one thing. A favor, actually. He gave me a small box and told me that one day, if someone came asking about him, someone who looked like him, I should give it to her." Emily's breath caught. "You still have it?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, I do."
He disappeared into the back room and returned with a small wooden box, the same type of wood as the one Emily had found in her mother's attic. When he placed it in her hands, it felt warm, almost familiar. She opened it carefully. Inside lay a folded photograph and a letter. The photograph showed her as a child, sitting on her father's shoulders at the beach, both of them laughing. The letter was short. "My Emily, if you ever find this, it means I couldn't say goodbye the way I wanted to. I left not because I stopped loving you or your mother, but because I didn't want you to see me weak. I thought I was protecting you from pain, but I see now I only created more of it. If you can forgive me, know that I carried your laughter in my heart until the very end. Dad." Emily's hands trembled. The cafe around her faded. All she could see was the small, boyish handwriting in the corner of the photo. "For my sunshine." Her mother used to say those same words. She blinked through tears, whispering, "He never stopped loving us." Daniel's voice was quiet. "No, he didn't." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was gentle, filled with understanding. Emily looked at Daniel and realized that he, too, was a part of this story. He had carried her father's secret for years, quietly protecting it out of respect. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Because it wasn't mine to tell. Your mother asked me not to, years ago." Emily's eyes widened. "You knew her?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, she came here once, a long time ago. After he passed, she sat in that very chair," he gestured to the one beside Emily,
and told me she wanted you to have a normal life. She said she would tell you one day, but I guess she couldn't bring herself to." For a long moment, Emily said nothing. Her heart was a mixture of sadness and quiet gratitude. Sadness for the years lost, gratitude for the love that had always been there, even when she hadn't seen it. She took a deep breath. "You must have known them both very well." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I did. Your father was my closest friend, and your mother, she was one of the kindest people I ever met. They loved you more than life itself. Sometimes love just doesn't find the right timing." Emily nodded, her throat tight. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I came here searching for truth, but what I found feels more like forgiveness." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep understanding. That's what truth often becomes when the heart's ready for it. They sat in silence again, watching as the morning sun lifted the fog outside. The golden light spilled across the cafe, landing softly on the photo still open on the table. And in that stillness, something shifted, not between them, but within Emily. The ache she had carried for so long felt lighter. Her past, once tangled in grief and unanswered questions, had found a voice. Through letters, through kindness, through the quiet strength of a man who had kept a promise. When she finally stood to leave, Daniel said gently, "You'll always have a place here, in Willow Creek." Emily smiled, her eyes shining. "I think I already do." As she stepped outside, the sunlight caught her hair and the cool breeze brushed her face. The town, with its chimes and quiet charm, no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like home, not because of what she'd discovered, but because of what she'd understood. Love doesn't always stay in one lifetime. Sometimes it lingers, in letters, in memories, and in the hearts of those who remember. And as Emily walked down the cobblestone street, her father's photo close to her heart, she knew the truth her parents hid had never been meant to wound her. It had been their way of saying they loved her, even when life made it hard to say goodbye. The days that followed felt softer, slower, as though Willow Creek itself understood the weight of everything Emily had uncovered. The crisp air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sunlight that filtered through the trees seemed warmer, gentler somehow. Emily spent her mornings walking by the river, her father's letter tucked inside her coat. Each time she read it, the ache in her heart lessened a little more. She no longer saw his absence as abandonment, but as a deeply human mistake, the choice of a man who loved too much and feared too deeply. One afternoon, she found herself at the cafe again. The bell above the door chimed, and Daniel looked up from behind the counter. His smile was calm, familiar, like a lighthouse she hadn't realized she needed. "You're becoming a regular," he said kindly. "I guess I am," she replied, smiling faintly. "Something about this place feels right." Daniel poured her coffee, and for a while, they sat in comfortable silence watching the sunlight dance on the window. There was no rush, no need for conversation, just the quiet understanding of two people connected by the same story. After a long moment, Emily finally spoke. "I think I understand now," she said softly, "why my mother kept it from me. She wasn't trying to hide the truth, she was trying to protect the peace I had." Daniel nodded slowly. "Sometimes love looks like silence. It doesn't always make sense until we're ready to listen." She looked down at her hands, then at him. "You must have kept their secret for so long. That must have been hard." Daniel smiled gently. "It wasn't easy, but I promised your father I'd look after the story, not just the secret. He wanted you to grow up without carrying his sorrow. Your mother wanted the same. I respected that." His words sank deep, not heavy, but steady, like roots finding the ground. Emily realized that every person who had loved her had done so in their own imperfect way, and somehow that made their love feel even more real. She reached into her pocket and unfolded her father's letter again, placing it on the table between them. "I used to think the truth would change everything," she said quietly, "but it hasn't really. It's just made me see everything more clearly." Daniel met her eyes. Sometimes clarity is the real gift. The cafe door opened then, and a gust of wind stirred the papers on the counter. Emily laughed softly as she caught the letter before it flew away. For the first time in a long time, her laughter didn't feel forced. That sound, light and genuine, seemed to ease something in Daniel too. He looked at her with a kind of quiet admiration, not for who she reminded him of, but for who she had become. He spoke gently. "You know, your father always said that one day you'd find your own kind of strength. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that keeps going even when the world doesn't make sense." Emily smiled through misty eyes. "I think I finally understand what he meant." They talked for a while longer, not about loss or regret, but about life, about her job in the city, about how the trees in Willow Creek seemed to whisper when the wind passed through them. The conversation felt easy, like the kind of talk that heals without trying to. As the sun began to set, Emily stood, slipping the letter back into her pocket. "I'm going to visit him tomorrow," she said softly, "to say goodbye properly this time." Daniel nodded, his expression warm. He'd like that. The next morning, the world felt still. The air was cool, the sky streaked with pale gold. Emily drove to the small cemetery at the edge of town, her heart calm. She carried a single white rose, her mother's favorite flower. When she found her father's grave, she knelt beside it, brushing away a few fallen leaves. The stone was simple, engraved with his name, Michael Turner, loved beyond words. She smiled faintly, her eyes wet but peaceful.
"Hi, Dad," she whispered. "I found you." For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the trees. Then she took out the photograph, the one of them at the beach, and placed it beside the rose. "I used to be angry," she said softly. "I didn't understand why you left. But now I know you were just scared, and I get that. I really do." Her voice wavered, but her heart felt steady. Mom did her best to protect me. And Daniel, he kept your promise. You were never really gone, were you? A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it felt like release, not grief. "I forgive you," she whispered, "and I'll carry your love with me, always." The sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling gently across the grass. For a moment, Emily closed her eyes and felt warmth on her skin, as if the world itself was answering her. When she stood to leave, she didn't look back in sorrow. She looked forward, toward the town, the river, the life still waiting for her. As she reached her car, she saw Daniel standing by the gate, holding 2 cups of coffee. He smiled, that same quiet smile she had come to trust. "Thought you might need one more for the road," he said. Emily accepted the cup, smiling through tears. "You always seem to know when to show up." "Just good timing," he replied softly. They stood there for a moment, the breeze carrying the scent of autumn leaves between them. Nothing more needed to be said. The silence was full of gratitude, of peace, of everything they both understood but didn't have to explain. Emily took a deep breath. "Thank you, Daniel, for keeping their stories safe.
and for helping me find mine." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Take care, Emily. The world's still got beautiful chapters waiting for you." She smiled, tucking the letter close to her heart. "I'll make sure to write them well." As she drove away from Willow Creek, the town grew smaller in her rearview mirror, but it didn't feel like leaving. It felt like carrying something precious with her. Because in finding the truth, she had found more than answers. She had found peace, forgiveness, and a love that had never really left. And for the first time in her life, Emily Turner didn't feel unfinished anymore. She felt whole. Some truths don't break us. They heal us. Emily's heart finally found what it had been missing: peace, forgiveness, and the love that never really left.